Imagine stepping outside on a sunny day, and suddenly everyone around you, friends, neighbors, even strangers, is dancing uncontrollably to a beat no one else can hear. Welcome to Strasbourg, 1518, where the streets were alive, literally, with people dancing themselves to death. The summer of 1518 in Strasbourg was hotter than most could remember. The cobblestone streets radiated the sun's heat, the timbered houses reflected light in sharp angles, and the Rhine shimmered lazily in the distance. The city, a hub of trade in the Holy Roman Empire, had a population strained by famine, poor harvests, and outbreaks of disease. Citizens moved briskly, anxious about their daily survival, mindful of the unseen threats that always seemed to lurk behind familiar faces. On July 14th, life appeared normal. Merchants shouted over the clang of carts, children played along the canals, and the smell of fresh bread drifted from ovens into the streets. Amid this normalcy, a single woman, Frau Troffea, stepped into the open square. She seemed ordinary at first glance, middle-aged and unassuming, carrying a basket of herbs to the market. But then she began to move. It started as a step, then a twirl, then a sudden leap into the air. Her arms flailed, her feet pounded the stones in an erratic rhythm, and her face was flushed with an energy that seemed almost supernatural. The people around her stopped. Some laughed nervously. Some whispered that she had been possessed. Hours passed. She did not stop. Her movements became more violent, more desperate. Sweat poured down her face. Her shoes wore thin. Blood began to streak her ankles from blistered feet. Yet, still, she danced. By the second day, a small crowd had gathered, first out of amusement, then out of concern. A man named Heinrich, a shoemaker, approached her cautiously. "Frau Troffea," he said, "are you ill? Do you need help?" But she did not answer. Her body moved as if following a rhythm no one else could hear. By nightfall, she returned home, exhausted but alive, only to be back in the square the next morning. By the third day, the phenomenon began to spread. A young apprentice, curious and perhaps mesmerized by Frau Troffea's movements, began dancing nearby. Then another, then a group of townspeople, men and women, young and old. Soon, dozens of people were in the streets, driven by an uncontrollable urge to move. Observers reported seeing children spinning and hopping beside their mothers, young men dancing with such vigor that their faces turned purple. The city streets were filled with a relentless thump of feet and the murmurs of panic from onlookers. Merchants abandoned their stalls, unable to compete with the chaos of moving bodies. Priests shook their heads, fearing divine wrath. Families tried to pull loved ones away, but resistance was futile. One chronicler wrote, "The afflicted cannot be restrained. They leap, they fall, they rise again. They are not possessed by drunkenness, for they vomit not. They are not touched by plague, for their bodies are warm and well. Yet they dance endlessly, as if the very air compels them." By the end of the first week, more than 30 individuals had joined the dancing. Within 10 days, that number had swelled into the hundreds. Strasbourg was gripped by a fear that no one could name. City authorities, bewildered and desperate, consulted the physicians of Strasbourg. Using the medical understanding of the time, based on her moral theory, they concluded the dancers suffered from hot blood. The cure, they decided, was more dancing. To facilitate this, the city built a wooden stage in the central square and hired musicians to play constantly. They encouraged dancers to continue, hoping the excess energy would burn itself out. The logic seemed absurd, but in a world where disease and divine punishment were often indistinguishable, it made sense. With music and encouragement, the frenzy intensified. Streets overflowed with bodies in motion. Merchants abandoned trade. Town criers called for calm, but their voices were drowned out by the relentless thud of dancing feet. Eyewitnesses described dancers collapsing, only to rise again, as if some invisible force compelled them. Among the afflicted was Hildegard, a young mother. She danced while clutching her infant, refusing to release the child even as sweat soaked her hair and blisters formed on her feet. Another, Johann the baker, reportedly danced continuously for 4 days, collapsing from exhaustion and dehydration before returning the next day as if nothing had happened. By the third week, the cost became grimly apparent. Exhaustion, dehydration, and malnutrition claimed lives. Some dancers reportedly died of strokes or heart failure. Chroniclers noted that bodies sometimes remained in the streets, legs twitching involuntarily, until neighbors or officials removed them. The city teetered on the edge of collapse. Shops closed. Markets went unsupplied. Hospitals were overwhelmed. Public fear reached a fever pitch, and priests called for mass prayer, processions, and penance. Authorities tried isolation and containment, but nothing worked. The dancing was relentless. Town officials, unsure how to manage the situation, oscillated between encouraging it to burn out the fever and punishing participants to discourage what they believed was sinful behavior. Modern historians and scientists have debated the cause of the dancing plague for centuries. Ergot poisoning. A fungus called ergot grows on damp rye and produces hallucinogenic compounds similar to LSD. Consuming contaminated bread could induce convulsions, hallucinations, and spasms, possibly explaining some of the dancing behavior. Mass hysteria. Some psychologists argue that the event was mass psychogenic illness, a phenomenon where collective stress manifests physically. Strasbourg citizens were suffering famine, disease, and social pressure, conditions ripe for such an outbreak. Religious and cultural causes. Many believe the plague was divine punishment from St. Vitus, the patron saint of dancers. Processions, rituals, and public dancing were considered both a cause and cure. Neurological disorders. Rare conditions like chorea could have played a role in some individuals, combining with psychological stress to create mass involuntary movements. By mid-July, Strasbourg was no longer just a city. It had become a stage for the most bizarre and terrifying performance in human history. Crowds of dancers filled the streets from dawn to dusk. They moved as if possessed, their feet pounding the cobblestones, their faces glistening with sweat. The air smelled of dust, sweat, and fear. Onlookers dared not approach too closely, lest they, too, be overtaken by the inexplicable urge to move. Among the earliest to join Frau Troffea was Lieslot, a weaver's daughter. She had first been drawn by curiosity. How could one woman dance so endlessly? Within hours, she too could not stop, and soon her friends were compelled to follow. Lieslot's diary, reconstructed from chroniclers' notes, described the surreal sensations. It is as if my feet have a mind of their own. I want to stop. I tell myself to rest, but they do not listen. I hear music that no one else plays. My body is both mine and not mine. This compulsion was universal among dancers. The phenomenon appeared indiscriminate, young and old, male and female, peasants and artisans alike. Some historians suggest that the shared suffering of famine and disease, combined with fear of divine punishment, created fertile ground for mass psychogenic illness, an involuntary, contagious compulsion that spread faster than any disease. Day 1 to 3, the frenzy begins. Frau Troffea dances alone for hours. Dozens gather, mostly out of curiosity. Some attempt to intervene, others join voluntarily. Streets are filled with a surreal mix of movement and astonishment. Day 4 to 7, the number of dancers grows exponentially. By the end of the first week, over 50 people are involved. Town officials panic. Physicians are consulted. Their diagnosis, hot blood. The cure is more dancing. A stage is erected, musicians hired. Day 8 to 14, hundreds now dance. Merchants abandon stalls. Children and elderly are affected. The city's economy slows. Markets are chaotic. Reports note people collapsing from exhaustion yet rising again, as if compelled by an unseen force. Chroniclers write of dancers whose feet are bleeding but who continue without rest. Day 15 to 21, deaths occur. Heart failure, strokes, and dehydration claim some dancers. Families mourn in silence. Authorities consider isolation and punishment but are afraid to act decisively. Priests organize mass prayer and processions, invoking St. Vitus to halt the madness. Day 22 to 30, the plague reaches a peak. Entire neighborhoods are affected. Streets are impassable. Musicians play day and night to assist dancers. Chroniclers report horrifying scenes, dancers tripping over others, falling into fountains, yet rising again to continue. The city seems suspended in a surreal, nightmarish rhythm. Hildegard and her child, a young mother, dancing continuously while clutching her infant. Neighbors feared for both lives. Miraculously, neither died, though both were exhausted and scarred psychologically. Johann the baker, after dancing nonstop for 4 days, he collapsed. Yet, he returned to the streets the next morning, convinced the music called him. Chroniclers note his feet were raw, his clothing soaked, and his face pale, but he moved with unstoppable energy. Frau Magdalena, the midwife, she danced in the streets for nearly 2 weeks, helping fellow dancers when they fell, despite her own suffering. Her resilience became legendary. These stories humanize the epidemic, showing that behind the surreal mass hysteria were real people enduring unimaginable physical and psychological stress. Strasbourg's authorities attempted a range of interventions, none of which worked. First, they tried isolation, confining dancers to their homes or specific buildings. This was largely ineffective. Dancers often escaped or were too strong-willed to be restrained. Next, they encouraged more dancing, building stages in public squares and hiring musicians to maintain the rhythm. They believed that if dancers expended their energy fully, the compulsion would burn out. This strategy backfired, feeding the frenzy and spreading it further. Priests and clergy tried religious interventions. Processions invoking Saint Vitus, believed to be the patron saint of dancers. Public penance and prayers sprinkling holy water on dancers' feet. While these measures reflected the era's understanding of divine influence on health, they did little to halt the epidemic. Chroniclers observed that dancers seemed oblivious to punishment or prayer, their movements almost trance-like. Modern research suggests the outbreak was likely multicausal. Stress and mass psychogenic illness. Strasbourg population suffered famine, disease, and social instability. Such stress can manifest in physical behaviors like dancing, especially when people observe others behaving similarly. Possible ergot poisoning. Rye contaminated with a hallucinogenic fungus ergot could have triggered hallucinations, spasms, and compulsive movements. Cultural and religious factors. Fear of divine punishment and devotion to Saint Vitus may have reinforced behavior. No single explanation fully accounts for the phenomenon. The dancing plague of 1518 represents an intersection of psychology, biology, culture, and superstition, an event where human behavior transcended simple categorization. By late September, the plague ended as suddenly as it began. The compulsion lifted. Dancers collapsed, exhausted, and some returned to normal life without apparent long-term physical harm. Those who survived bore psychological scars and stories that would circulate for generations. Authorities never understood the cause. Chroniclers documented the event meticulously, noting numbers, dates, and names, but offered no explanation. Modern historians continue to debate the origins, leaving the epidemic shrouded in mystery. The dancing plague has since become a symbol of the strange intersections between mind, body, and society. Artists immortalize the scenes in woodcuts and illustrations. Writers reference it in tales of mass hysteria and human psychology. Musicians compose works evoking the manic rhythm. It serves as a reminder that human behavior can be influenced by stress, observation, and belief, sometimes with deadly consequences. Strasbourg citizens were ordinary people caught in extraordinary circumstances, their bodies compelled by forces science has only partially explained. Today, the dancing plague of 1518 is studied by psychologists, historians, and medical researchers. It informs our understanding of mass psychogenic illness, epidemic behavior, and social contagion. It also highlights the limits of contemporary medicine in explaining unusual phenomena. Strasbourg remembers 1518 as a cautionary tale of how stress, superstition, and collective experience can produce events that seem beyond explanation. It reminds us that history is filled with mysteries, where the boundaries of mind, body, and culture blur in unexpected ways. By mid-August, Strasbourg was unrecognizable. Cobblestone streets, usually bustling with merchants and shoppers, now resembled a stage for ceaseless movement. Dancers filled every square, alley, and bridge. Their feet pounded a relentless rhythm into the stones, echoing across the city. The air smelled of sweat, dust, and the faint aroma of bread from abandoned ovens. Among the dancers was Elizabeth, a young maid who had first joined out of sympathy for Frau Troffea. By the third week, she described her body as a vessel not entirely my own. She could not stop, even to drink water or eat bread. Chroniclers noted her determination and resilience, but she eventually collapsed from exhaustion, only to rise the next day, pulled along by the crowd's momentum. Peter, the apprentice blacksmith, danced for 7 consecutive days. Friends tried to pull him aside, but the compulsion was stronger than their grip. Onlookers remarked that his face was pale and lips blue, yet he continued, as if possessed by an invisible drummer. Children were not spared. Young boys and girls twirled alongside parents and elders, sometimes holding hands, sometimes spinning alone. Some fell into fountains or carts, but the rhythm would pull them back to movement. The city was trapped in a surreal cycle of motion, noise, and exhaustion. As August turned into September, exhaustion and dehydration claimed lives. Estimates vary, but chroniclers report dozens, possibly hundreds, died from heart failure, strokes, or sheer physical strain. Bodies were removed from streets, some still moving slightly from convulsive rhythms. Families mourned quietly, afraid to intervene lest they also succumb. Priests conducted vigils and special masses, invoking Saint Vitus. Yet the dancing continued, as if nothing could halt the force driving it. Survivors were physically weakened and psychologically scarred. Many reported feeling an almost irresistible call to move even after the plague ended. Scholars suggest this was a combination of extreme stress, social contagion, and lingering neurological effects in some individuals. Modern researchers study the 1518 plague as a case of mass psychogenic illness. Conditions like famine, disease, superstition, and social anxiety can trigger physical manifestations, often contagious within a group. Additionally, some scholars consider ergot poisoning, though this cannot explain why certain areas were affected while others were spared. Neurologists point to chorea-like symptoms combined with extreme psychological stress. Psychologists note that the phenomenon highlights human susceptibility to behavioral contagion. Observing others behaving unusually can trigger involuntary mimicry, sometimes with fatal consequences. By late September 1518, the dancing ceased as mysteriously as it had begun. One day, bodies collapsed in the streets, spent. Water and food were finally consumed. Streets slowly emptied, and the city returned to a semblance of normalcy. No intervention had definitively cured the dancers. Historians speculate that exhaustion, changing weather, and natural social cycles contributed. Strasbourg citizens survived, though their stories and scars remained. Chroniclers noted the sudden silence, contrasting it with the relentless pounding that had dominated summer days. The dancing plague left a profound imprint on European history. Artists depicted frenzied crowds, with woodcuts and later paintings capturing surreal energy. Literature referenced the event as a cautionary tale of human susceptibility to mass hysteria and divine punishment. Modern psychology studies the Strasbourg plague as an example of stress-induced mass psychogenic illness, illustrating how social and environmental pressures can manifest physically. It also reminds us that culture, religion, and biology intersect in ways that may seem inexplicable. The 1518 plague teaches multiple lessons. Human endurance. People dance beyond the limits of normal physical capacity, showing both vulnerability and resilience. Social contagion. Behavior can spread rapidly in groups, especially under stress or anxiety. Limits of medical knowledge. Strasbourg's physicians were constrained by contemporary understanding, showing how incomplete knowledge can lead to ineffective solutions. Cultural interpretation. Belief in divine punishment shaped the response, highlighting the role of religion in interpreting health crises. Nearly 500 years later, the dancing plague of 1518 remains one of history's most perplexing events. Scholars continue to debate its causes, from ergot poisoning to mass hysteria. Yet no single explanation is universally accepted. The streets of Strasbourg no longer echo with the thump of hundreds of dancing feet, but the story lives on, in books, art, psychological studies, and imagination. It serves as a reminder that human behavior, especially under stress, can reach astonishing and sometimes deadly extremes. The dancing plague of 1518 was more than a medical curiosity, it was a human drama. Hundreds of ordinary people were swept up in an extraordinary event, their bodies driven by forces science cannot fully explain. It challenges our understanding of mind and body, culture and psychology, chaos and order. Strasbourg's Summer of Madness remains a symbol of the mysteries of human behavior, a vivid testament to the strange, sometimes tragic, power of shared experience. The dancing plague of 1518 wasn't just a bizarre story. It was a lesson in the limits of the human mind and body, the power of fear, and the strange way communities respond to crisis. So next time you feel compelled to dance, make sure it's your own rhythm, not history repeating itself.